Voilà, et je vais passer la parole à Nathalie Launay.
Right, let me call upon Nathalie Launay from GALID to facilitate this roundtable on trusted services. Nathalie, you have the floor. Good afternoon. I know it's the middle of the afternoon, but we're going to try and keep you awake on this new roundtable, new trusted services, value added, and implementation. We have 55 minutes exactly. So I will be the facilitator, but also the timekeeper, so that we have 5 minutes at the end for questions from the audience. Our three experts first, ladies first, Sandrine Hiller. Sandrine is the head of the AFNOR Normalization Commission, working on documents and digital preservation. She's also the head of the new standardization of AFNOR on electronic billing. As in charge of IFITURA, she works on issues such as cyber security, on digital identity, electronic billing, and again, trusted services, which is the point of our roundtable. Jérôme Bordier. Jérôme is a recognized expert in terms of digital services, particularly on electronic signature. Jérôme is on our roundtable as General Secretary of the Club PCO, an association 15 years old, bringing together French trusted services providers, more than 40. We also have Norberto Ostallo, 15 years experience in the field of ITC, digital transformation, and trusted services. Norberto is today in charge of international accounts for InfoCert, one of the European leaders of trusted services providers. Norberto will participate in the roundtable in French, but if you wish to speak English, that's no problem. You can also have interpretation into English because you're Italian. Let's start with this roundtable on trusted services, digital trusted services. Before we talk about the new services that came about during the revision of the directive in June 2024, maybe we can talk about the former trusted services, ADAS, during the first version of ADAS, ADAS 1 in July 2014, because with the revision, there has been a complete change in terms of the requirements for qualified providers, and also on the definition of the services, particularly for electronic signature. This is why I will start with Jérôme, who knows the topic, to talk about the purpose of this change for qualified providers and the major changes for electronic signature. Thank you, Nathalie. Thank you, everyone. To talk about qualified signature, IDAS 2, there's one key point. To the contrary of IDAS version 1, version 2 talks about qualified signature. In the last 10 or 15 years, we've been signing electronically. Most of them are simple signatures, sometimes advanced, very rarely qualified. The evolution of IDAS 2 is to allow more easily the use of the qualified electronic signature by everyone. IDAS version 2 includes a number of conditions, some that you will find positive, others negative, and I'll try and describe that to you. First condition that we have as a facilitating measure for qualified signature, the use of the European wallet. We've talked a lot about the European wallet since this morning. The wallet being elevated identification factor, this will generate an automatically qualified electronic signature. The club PSCO has participated with the ANTS in the drafting of a standard convention for members of the club to integrate France identity directly as a trusted service providers, so as to simplify the use of the wallet, the use of the digital ID, to give a qualified certificate, which is the basis for qualified electronic signature. That's the first incidence that we can identify in the version 2 of IDAS v2. Second change, contrary to the version 1, we looking at remote identification. In the version 1, there was face-to-face identification. There were several methods of authentication and identification, or something else. The something else wasn't described, but remember, we were back in 2014. So that was before COVID. Nothing was done remotely. Since the version 2 is now giving pride of place to remote identification as a factor that can provide a qualified certificate and a qualified e-signature. I'll come back to this later. And then, of course, the directive is also evolving to explain or change the legal foundations in terms of obtaining a qualified certificate. In IDAS v1, you could get a qualified certificate when you presented a substantial EID. Now, in order to promote the wallet, to push towards the qualified certificate, the qualified signature, the Commission wished to remove this provision. So there's no longer the possibility to get the certification on a simple presentation. If you have a substantial identification, but the substantial ID is no longer possible on the basis of a certificate solely. Version 2 also brings a whole array of new requirements, new standards, particularly regarding the implementation, and IDAS and the production requirements for qualified certificates. This is all changing, taking into account the legal evolutions of other directives. And so the end result, to be clear, is that we have some 150 additional requirements applicable to qualified service providers producing qualified certificates, and this has a number of logistics and operational consequences. Thank you, Jérôme. I wasn't sure you were finished, so let me look at Norberto now. InfoCert is a provider of qualified certificates and qualified signatures. Do you share Jérôme's assessment? Is there anything you want to add? How are you going to adapt to those new requirements, 150 new requirements, and to the change? I share Jérôme's analysis. And as a business, InfoCert, we see IDAS 2 bringing about new qualified services. We've talked about the remote qualified signature. This, for example, is a service that we have made available 10 years ago already. So there's a standard European. We will have a European standard for the qualified signature, which is a good thing, because this will allow us the possibility to offer the exact same service in all countries of the EU. But there's a market. There are stakeholders offering services. Some countries have taken this up for private companies and even some public companies. So the standardization, harmonization of services that we had with ADAS version 1, but now we're seeing new trusted services. Which are they? The electronic depository, the attributes that we mentioned during the roundtable on the wallet, and archiving. So Norberto, I continue with you. Electronic archiving, is that a truly new service? I believe it is not. So what changes do you have to put in place within InfoCert to be compliant with the new requirements within ADAS V2? From a business point of view, electronic archiving is an evolution from what we had in V1, the preservation of electronic signature. The point was to keep the legal value of a signature. Now, with the archiving functionality, we can have the preservation of any document signed or not, or any digital information, maybe a document, maybe an image, maybe a video. You can archive any information, whatever the support, and preserve the legal validity over time. It's a new service at the European level. It's the first time we had this European-wide standard, but before V2 of the directive, there were equivalent services. It was done nationally or locally. In France, in Italy, the archiving service exists. There are providers providing this service. The advantage of having a European standard is unification, harmonization, and the fact that we only have one technical standard applicable in the different countries in the EU. And we're hoping that this will do away with national differences. Because we know that even if there are European-wide levels, countries are always free to add local conditions. Yes, the whole point of harmonization is standardization. And this is a good transition to you, Sandrine. You are expert on standardization. You actively participate in the AFNOR Standardization Committee. So you are in close connection with the Technical Committee 468, having established a new standard on electronic archiving 18170. Can you tell us what is in this standard? What are the differences with the national rules or national references, France, Belgium, Italy? But before we enter into the detail, maybe you could define the different concepts. It's quite complex. Electronic archiving, Norberto talked about electronic preservation, and we talk about digital protection. Now, yes, in France, we have the electronic safe, but we also have the secured access that you may know where you may keep your pay slips. In France, we make a difference that is quite specific. The safe system is a software where the archiving, electronic archiving, is a service. It's something that relies on security, strategy, physical measures, and the way we manage is quite different. Just to say things simply, let's imagine you put CD-ROM in a safe in a bank and you're unable to read it because you don't have the reader. It's exactly the same with this electronic safe. It guarantees you that it's safe, but it doesn't guarantee you that you will be able to read it in a few years' time. It's a simplified image, but it makes it understandable. Whereas electronic archiving is interesting for French providers, for European providers. Again, the point is to ensure integrity of data and access to data above and beyond the validity of the support. Be able to read documents in 40 years, 50 years, 19 years, because behind ADAS V2, you have the private and business, but you also have public services, and public services have different requirements in terms of preservation of data, and they also have to deal with digitalization. So electronic archiving is ensuring the long-term preservation and access of elements above and beyond the technological value of the support. As Norberto said, this electronic archiving system is for signed or unsigned documents, and there's an article 45G in IDAS V2 that talks about this possibility to ensure the validity of the different elements that are being archived. And this is a service provided by trusted service providers with very stringent standards and rules. And the basic idea is to make sure that documents have full integrity and full readability. Now, it's something we started working on in Europe 18 months ago within the technical committee, within the standardization committee, bringing together several European countries, and we started mapping what was in place, what the different countries were doing. And this is when we realized very clearly that we don't all approach archiving in the same way. In France, archiving, if we say we put a document in electronic archives, I have traceability, I have IT safety, physical security, protocols, and other countries like Germany and elsewhere where they had signed documents, doubly signed documents, because really security was in the electronic signature. So this technical committee looking at the technical spec drafted to answer Article 45G on electronic archiving. After 28 work meetings with all countries, we reached a consensus, and the consensus was to be able to provide a trusted archiving system unifying these two approaches or taking into account these two approaches. Now this technical spec has reached the formal vote stage. We, under the French chairmanship of the technical committee, our work was to make sure that the text would be taken over in the implementation documents to come out on the 21st of May. So we're really running after time, 18 months of work to come up with one document that is a consensus, a compromise for 15 countries in the EU. So a lot of work to reach a standardization consensus in terms of archiving. But when we talk about electronic archiving, is that naturally connected to the repository? E-Literature, are there standardization works also on the ledger, e-ledger? Well, the ledger is a foolproof recording with a chronological data and assumption of integrity, so non-modifiable. The ledger is one way for an electronic archiving system to ensure the audit trail, the tracking. Of course, there are documents, of course, there are safety measures, but you need constant integrity check with crypto methods and calculation and recalculation to show that documents have not been tampered with. And the second factor to ensure is an audit trail of all critical events anything that can happen in the archiving system. And you can have either diary protocols, like we do in France, or use the ledger technology with a chronological, fault-proof recording, integrity of the documents, integrity of the audit trail, physical integrity. Integrity is the buzzword in terms of archiving. The ledger is one of the means for a qualified system to keep trackability, to keep an audit trail. So it's an additional means of support. It's one of the means, the ledger is one of the means to do the electronic archiving. What about standardization works? This is the mandate of another committee working with ISO. They've worked a lot on blockchain. There were a few meetings, and we have to continue working for a few months to come up with technical specifications, just like we have for e-archiving. There are some documents, but we still have a few months to work to get to the technical specs. Yes, any standardization work is done on the basis of consensus, and it takes time before you can reach the stage of the final vote. I need to tell the audience that the European Commission has made accessible online on the hub of the Commission an agenda regarding all standardization work that stem from IDAS V2. And it's quite impressive, the number of standards, whether official standards, CEN, ISO, but also alliance or industry-specific standards like W3C. Sandrine, many standards, but how do we access them as a layman, whether when they're work in progress or even once they're published? Are they absolutely indispensable for our IDAS compliance? Yes. Access first. There are many documents within the CEN that are drafted by ETI, the technical standardization body. In terms of e-archiving, it's the AFNOR, the national body, the French national body within the European standardization. They are in charge at AFNOR of the publication. Today, a lot of national bodies are really relying on people like me and you, companies that go and buy the standards. So when they publish documents, often you have to buy the documents. But still, a lot of things are being done to make these documents accessible free of charge. That's the case for ETI. ETI is a completely different business model, and we really hope that as many documents as possible will be available freely, especially if they're made reference to in the implementation document. They have to be free. Thank you, Sandrine, for this word of explanation on the importance of standards and how do we access them. Then, Jérôme, earlier you started talking about another type of standards, the remote identity verification. You talked about upgrading, but there are alternative remote mechanisms. And it's important, and a lot is at stake. So what is feasible today in terms of reference or standards? What are we talking about? We're talking about having a similar level of trust when you're face-to-face or remotely. So we're talking about rising the trust level for a remote certificate following a meeting which is 100% remote. In IDAS V1, the totally remote was pretty much unheard of. And ANSSI in France had the courage to publish the first list of specs regarding remote identification verification, and so far only 4 actors have gone through the whole process, and they have to be congratulated for that. But the remote verification of identity, PVID, this is something that cannot remain clearly, strictly national. We work in Europe. IDAS V2 is a European-wide legislation. Hence, we need to put in place a harmonized system. And what did we see in 2021, 22, with the COVID on top? We saw that each and every European country was doing it its own way, more or less stringent. Some countries were really loose in terms of checking remotely. So we had to find a way to make the different European countries merge their verification systems, to carry out verification in a similar way. So a group of experts came up with a new version, V2.1.1, and this new version of remote identification process is available since last February 2025, and we're hoping for this to be referenced in the execution articles, drafts for Article 24 of V2 for the production of qualified certificate remotely. Now, why? We would go from a French standard to a European standard, but in France, things are done properly. Proof is that we have certified players, certified documents, and within the club PSCO, we've now made a booklet available, which is a document comparing the requirements to get the recognition of a verified partner, compare that with the standard European standard published in February of this year. Why did we do this comparison? We did it, well, to help French providers, but also to show, but also to prove that there will be a consequence in the future for those remote providers. And we see that the methodology that we find in the European standard are 95% those that we already had in France and that were produced more than 4 years ago, thanks to the ANSSI mainly. Out of the 400 requirements, 50 are different from the French standard to the European standard. No major differences, it's drafted differently, but the effort of a service provider already certified in France will be very minor. Yes, a provider already recognized in France won't have much effort to reach the European level. And each country retains some leeway in any way. Yes, but European harmonization wants this standard to be the golden rule, the one and only, to avoid the unfair competition that we've seen over the last 10 years, legal but unfair. And not just for qualified certificates, because the same methods are being used for trusted services, e-signature from the advanced level for the issuance of a registered letter electronically, and in the field of payment to open a bank account with an alternative ID means of support. And this will be also very useful to receive an attribute attestation by an electronic service provider. So we now come to this new service, attribute attestation, created by IDAS V2. And as Ilyes from ANSSI said earlier, it can work associated or not with the web. Norberto, you as a trusted service provider, I think you're very interested by those new services. Can you tell us what's the point of this new service for you as an attestation provider?
This is a new service that's going to be very interesting. Before talking about the new service, let's talk about what we currently have. Currently, right now, a citizen, already has the option in some European countries creating their own online digital identity. There are certain countries that have already put this in place. So for digital management, you have France Connect in France, you have INCYBER in Belgium, Aspic in Italy, Bank ID in some of the Scandinavian countries. These are solutions that are national solutions with standards and regulations which are very different from one country to the next. There's now a desire, a will to harmonize that and create that interoperability between the systems, but that's a very limited approach. That's why we're talking about the attestation of qualified attributes. It's about harmonizing and achieving interoperability by design. And the attributes will be managed by a shared standard, and the solution, we hope, will be the European digital identity wallet, but with the same degree of technological standard. So it should be immediately possible to immediately exchange that information. Okay, but what type of information are you talking about? Well, this attestation of the attribute attestation. We're talking about pivot identities, electronic identification factors. Oh, that's something that's really important. It's going to change with IDES version 2. Currently, we're only allowed to exchange information connected to our identity, our name, date of birth, that sort of thing. In the future, with this attribute management, we should be able to exchange any information. Any sort of information can be converted into a digital attribute in our wallet. So, for example, information about your employment history. If you actually are a qualified doctor, if you say you're a doctor or a lawyer or whatever it is. Any number of types of information, and there's a very interesting, very important point, because the technical infrastructure to support this, we need a system in the wallet. We have privacy by design and privacy by default, so it means that information is managed and handled in centralized databases. For the government has its own databases, the service provider, they have their database. In the future, that information must only be present in the wallet of the user. It's the user with their digital wallet. They get to decide whether or not they share that information with an external service provider, whether they want that service or not. Okay, and what is the impact going to be of the relationship between the issues of attributes and the wallet providers, right? The service providers providing the wallets? I'm sure there is going to be an impact. The business model currently is very clear. There is a digital identity. Usually you pay for the use of that service because they need to, because it cuts down the cost of identifying an end users. And this is also true for attestation of attributes. It's the person who needs the information is going to pay for it. The service provider, I'm afraid, sorry. The service provider is going to pay. Right, the service provider is going to pay the company or the government or whoever is supplying that service, they're providing the authentication service. But that does raise a number of problems regarding privacy. So the service provider, the company which is issuing the information shouldn't know they don't know where the information is being used. That's what needs to happen for users to have trust in it. For example, privacy by default and privacy by design for invoicing, there's still a complex issue, isn't it? Okay, so we're doing pretty well with this roundtable. We're moving along pretty well, but there is one question which is a relatively open question we haven't tackled yet, which is what role for these trusted services in a broader digital environment? It's a relatively open question, I admit it. So I thought, why don't I set you a challenge then to really get us on the topic? You've got, imagine, I've got to set the timer. No, it's okay. You're not too bad, actually. 3 or even 4 minutes, because we're doing pretty well for time. Each of you, in turn, I want you to answer this question. What role for these trusted services in this context of broader digitalization of services? Sandrine, to you first. Start with a mini legal point. Qualified services are interesting because if you're using a qualified service, you have that the inverted proof. It's not for you to demonstrate that you've got a good service. It's the person that opposite who has to prove that you've done something wrong. So that inverts the burden of proof. So that's interesting if you're working with trusted providers. They put a lot of resources behind that. This idea of having qualified services provides a degree of legal protection for service providers, but the IDAS regulation doesn't oblige you to use these services. You can continue using non-qualified services if you prefer. But if you run into a problem, if you run into a legal dispute, then you're going to end up spending a lot more money on lawyers than you would have done on using the certified service. So that's just to explain a bit why the qualified services have a competitive advantage. It's an interesting form of legal perfection. I think that EDAS regulation is part of that. EDAS is, of course, a European regulation. So the idea is that any qualified services in one legal member should be recognized as a qualified service in all of the member states. But, there are still national, local specificities to contend with. And so we do tend to prioritize service providers who are geographically close to us. But these trusted services, in principle and theory, it should allow for greater openness. They're preparing identical level of services with verified identical levels of trust, whether they're in Italy, Lithuania, France, Spain, wherever. So this concept is really important. It's really important to note that as a qualified, certified services is a real asset, and it can give you that extra degree of legal protection, which is very important for all companies, really, for all businesses, because the archiving, for example, just take an example. There are potential legal problems, or you potentially just further down the line. If you get into a dispute, you have to go back and find the proof, the documents, the contracts. You're going to show them to a magistrate. So it's true also it's useful for the company, but those systems use these archiving systems to fulfill your responsibilities if you're obliged to prove yourself in front of the justice. So this idea of digitalizing these services, I mean, the process is already well underway, but everything that's going on in the digital sphere, that's not been naive. It's been driven by Europe at the moment. So there are going to be impacts on things that exist in France. So in France, we have a certification system, electronic archiving system, which is certified. Obviously, it's going to be impacted because this electronic archiving system. In our 71 working group, we've got a working group. We're looking at analysing the potential impact of this new qualified service, and it's kind of, it's true from all trusted services. Really, I think there are evolution in the way that we use things, or evolution in the way that regulatory texts are framed. So, things are always changing. But I think the sort of a qualified signature, these things have been around for a while. A lot of people would like to see it, but not many people are yet using it because the user experience as it currently stands is not good enough. If I want a qualified service, I have to physically go out, show my identified documents, and get it. If I could get one remotely, that would be a considerable step forward to be able to have just have it inside your phone, to have it on a digital wallet, so you can sign, you can prove your identity with a heightened level of security because it's backed up by the state. It's a government-backed identification system that's going to open up doors, and that's really a seismic change. So, the rapid rate of digitalization, of dematerialization, there's an increasing number of services. They're answering new demands and new service uses. So I think it's more or less, broadly speaking, good news. Yes, good news. Okay, good. Jerome, does it sound like good news to you? Well, there's no digital ecosystem without trusted services. It's not possible. It's not viable in the long term if we can't put our trust in the services we're using. The digital products, digital documents, the digital transactions that all of us are making on a day-to-day basis, they're vulnerable, they're fallible, they're contestable if we don't have trusted services. We can't have that. We can't build a new world. We can't achieve any progress unless that progress is built upon strong, trusted infrastructure. We built motorways so cars could travel faster, safely. It's exactly the same concept what we're doing here. So the new concepts that we've just explained, that we started working with from A to Z, from production through to archiving, they need to be founded upon trusted quality services. Hence the PSCO club, which I represent, that's what we exist for, is to champion and promote those services. I mean, there's still, of course, issues to be resolved. There are challenges that we need to face up to, and not least because the challenge now is to move from a national ecosystem to a European scale ecosystem. We've already mentioned that one of the big challenges we face is to know who has access to the system for issuing these certificates. And the IEDAS regulation, you might have not noticed, we have authentic sources. Now, an authentic source is the person who has the information legally application. For example, I have a degree from a certain university. The authentic source of that information is the university. Who has access to that authentic source of the information? That's an underlying economic there. If I have to give my degree certificate in a digitalized format, I need to be able to go and get that information before I can pass it on to somebody else. And everybody needs to have an interest in this. Obviously, people have legitimate need for that information, and those are people who have a legitimate obligation to give it to you. We don't yet have all the answers because the number of attributes is potentially limitless. The volume of data we're going to be handling securely in a secure, trusted manner. I mean, we don't even know. I couldn't even list all the potential data points. So yes, there are challenges to overcome. Yes, there are challenges in terms of securing digital processes from A to Z, but broadly speaking, generally speaking, I think it's fair to say there's been a massive amount of trust, and in the last 10 years, I think collectively, we've reached a level of maturity which is already pretty satisfactory. Okay, so looking forward to the next implementation text, the execution text and the consultation, public consultation. We're still waiting for that, aren't we? Norberto, same question to you. All the broader digitalization of the life and of services? Well, first thing, we've seen that from a regulatory perspective, it's true that there are new services which are encompassed by ADAS 2, but we also have a number of services which already exist at national and local level, for remote signatures, archiving. The European norm standards is going to approve companies, certify companies, allow them to offer these services in the same manner in all countries across the European Union. That really is a very important change for our clients. For example, if we're working with, and we work with Europe's biggest banking groups. If a banking group asks us for an archiving service, we could. Currently, we have to have an archiving institution. Firstly, another one for France, another for every other country, and it's a lot. I like that for a lot of services. In the future, we hope, very much hope, we'll be able to offer a single archiving service which will be applicable and valid across all of Europe, at the very least, across the European Union. And what we're also seeing now, there are already countries outside the European Union who are accepting the validity of EU services, that they are considered to be legally valid locally because they recognise the quality, the degree of the exacting standard of those EU standards. Yes, of course. So the UK, for example, in spite of Brexit, I believe the UK have retained the EU standard. Yes, but also North Africa, a couple of countries in the Middle East as well, they're already accepting the IEDAS. Yes, I completely agree. In fact, there are countries that are already asking me if they can get IEDAS certification even if they're in the Middle East. I have to explain to them, I'm sorry, but IEDAS applies only in Europe. And why? Because obviously it's visible from the outside that over the past 20 years, the digitalization market, the market of trustworthy digitalization, the market has continued to grow. The number of vulnerability affairs, the number of companies that have had security incidents that have been hacked, trusted services have been hacked. I mean, very, very few. And so, naturally, there are countries that have they've come to recognise the quality of European regulations and the quality of the services that are being provided within the framework of that religion, and they would like to reproduce that service or to join up which is possible under the international aspect of the AIDA stuff. I've handled a few myself. They're submitting these countries, who are applying to the European Commission to be covered by the AIDAS regulation standard for countries outside Europe. Yeah, of course, with GDPR, which has become the model to follow for protecting data rights. We now have the AIDAS regulation and the European Digital Identity Wallet. Well, perhaps that be in the future, that'll be the gold standard for protecting digital identities, copied all over the world. A great way to conclude, I think, for that question on digitalization. We've got a little bit of time ahead of us, so perhaps we could take 2, maybe even 3. Guy, what do you think? So I'm going to turn to you in the room. If anybody would like to ask a question, well, stand up first of all. It helps us to hear your voice better. You can present yourself, introduce yourself, and ask if you don't mind keeping it relatively concise. A short and direct question. Nobody wants to ask a question? Yes, hello. Imad Odd from FFI here. You talked a lot about archiving, but I think I missed a key detail. Who's archiving what exactly? For example, if I've got a degree from a university, is it the National Archives that are keeping a record of that, or is it the university who has to archive that information? Or is it some kind of like public notary? No, I mean, in that case, it's the university, for example. They keep records of who their graduates are. So either they'll decide to outsource, externalize, that they could choose to outsource their archive to a trusted service provider, or they could do it in-house, which I think seems a little less likely but more risky. But the idea is that they are service providers. So it's a kind of outsourcing. When you go look for a trusted outsource provider, if you can't yourself manage all the measures necessary to secure your archiving services, it's always the commissioning party is going to be the university. They retain the ownership, the owners of that degree data, but there are multiple companies for them which could be subcontracted to archive the data. Okay, well, the difference with the physical world, when we're talking about the digital realm, if, for example, I've got a signed degree, is it going to be in 20, 50 years from now? What if the algorithms break down? What's the validity if the algorithm breaks down? Is it not better that we have it archived with a trusted provider rather than actually leave it to the university to do this? I think you get my point. I can see a bit of movement to my right. Yes, okay, but just trusted service providers, they are in the process already of organising post-quantic migration processes, if that's what you're talking about, post-quantum, I believe. That transition is going to take a lot of resources, it's going to take a lot of effort, but trusted service providers are better placed than anybody else to oversee that migration with a degree of technicity, a degree of technical capacity, which is very high. Oh, just to go over when you're talking about archive, since we are talking about archiving, there's still companies today who are archiving documents. They're stocking them in the garage of the CEO because he likes to keep things close to hand. We've got people who have their paper archives, they're certified and they have very strong levels of security. It depends. It's how you manage your risk. I'm quite a fan of standardization certification because I think it really gives you something you can trust. The more you reach out to trusted, certified external providers, the less risk there is, and the better your risk management. I'll add I don't know if Norberto wanted to add something, but I'd say that electronic archiving can also be useful for service providers that need to approve their workings, with retaining their metadata. I presume that you, when you're providing your data certificates, I'm sure you have a service provider, they keep the proof, don't they? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, from a business perspective, our positioning is when we're trying to sell archivists, we explain to our clients that they're delegating the risk. That they're getting, and there's an external service provider who is they're qualified is important. The fact that they are trusted providers, they are qualified for the digital archive of your data. You are transferring some of the risk from your shoulders to theirs. And once that information's out there, once it's sent to the external service provider, we do get in return a sort of digital receipt where there is traceability, and that's the legal proof that we have fulfilled our responsibilities in relation to that data, and we will keep that as long as it's needed. Great. I hope that's answered your question. Are there any other questions? Yes, Eric from Crédit Mutuel Archive. My question is also about archiving. We know that there's someone made the connection between the electronic signature and the secure signature. It had to be qualified. I can't remember the article of the law that you cited. Is there going to be a future link or a bridge between qualified certified archiving and the storage conditions? Perhaps another decree in here in France to say, oh, this is what our qualified archiving is, to define it. Yeah, that's kind of the idea with these. If you're using a qualified service, you can assume there's a couple of this appears in French legislation at various points in various different articles of law. This is what we're working on right now with the Commission. Is we're proposing adjustments to the regulatory framework, to the law, to redefine what qualified archiving means. We have to wait to the implementation degrees. That's going to come on the 21st of May, hopefully. But the idea really is to work in collaboration with the LSSI side of things, because there's something which is fundamentally changing, is that the qualified services now, it's the INCYBER which is responsible for certifying certified providers. There are others which will be doing the audits, the INCYBER, which are responsible at the end for stamping the paper and proving. But currently, for example, archiving providers in France, they're certified by the FNOS, which is a different agency. That really changes things. But the idea is really to do just what you said, actually, is to make it clear what the conditions are for the storage conditions that which are regarded as being reliable, and that is if you use a trusted archiving service. But I mean, really, ask me that question again in a couple of months to see if we made it happen. Bear in mind that the AIDAS regulation is obviously applicable to all member states, including France. But of course, yes, absolutely, AIDAS, supersedes national regulation. But nonetheless, when you're in front of a judge in French court, that's not so simple to sell. That's a position. Okay, I think we've. Oh, one more question then. I wanted to know what your vision is of the 2 to 3 years to come now, particularly with the massification of online electronic invoicing. Are you expecting a massive uptick in the use of these trusted digital services, or is it too soon? What do you think is going to happen in the coming near future? It's an excellent question. The volume of invoices which should be going online is considerable. You should know that the French tax code offers several options to help you guarantee the legal validity of an online facture. You've got a signature and a stamp. That's not the only option either. So the fundamental question really is, are PDPs, service provision and service provider partners, different operators operating in the sector, are they going to start offering or encouraging the democratization, the massification of the use of electronic signatures or electronic stamps for their invoices? People aren't individually signing off on every invoice. Well, we call it in signature because that's just how we talk about it. It's actually a sort of electronic stamp. The question now is really, are we going to massify this use of electronic authentication of invoices or not? And we recommend it. Obviously, I think you'll have understood my perspective. We're trying to promote this kind of thing, but in reality, I mean, we don't have it under control yet. But we'll see. We'll see in the future. Two things. Well, there are securitization methods, which you call these, where you talk about different ways of authenticating and securing electronic invoices. And I'm strongly in favour of all businesses having electronic stamping systems, to electronic authentication systems for their documents. That's very, very useful. But there's another question here, which is authentication on partner platforms. Without giving away too many trade secrets in the future, the DGFIP wanted, more or less, they wanted the authentication to be used for all connections to partner platforms. There was already a lot of work to be done to make that a possibility. And they realized, well, okay, I don't know, we can't go that far, we can't go this far without this level of certification of authentication. So the DGFIP decided to kick that back to 2030. So there's a whole phase here, there's a process of transition towards online invoicing. Service providers, in terms of connections, that's not necessarily going to be managed with the same level of verification and certification that I would have liked to see, that the trusted providers are capable of providing. In fact, there is this opportunity there for suppliers of business wallets to, because absolutely there is a subject to be tackled there until we are capable of achieving that substantive level of robust certification authority. There's a business opportunity there, and there's a guide which has been published today by the multi-factor identification, which is not without going into details of robustness, and of course the famous attestations to represent your businesses. I think Norberto, good subject for the future also. Yes, absolutely. In France, but also to give you a more European perspective, for example, there are differences between different nations. We talked a little bit about electronic stamping in Italy. In Italy, they haven't accepted electronic invoice stamps, and it has to be signed by a legal representative of the company still. In other countries, electronic invoices don't need to be signed, so there's still a lot of work to be able to harmonise all those solutions. But, for example, like the Foresight, at InfoCert, we have this position where we offer these services. We can hopefully soon be able to offer all the service in any country in the world where the service exists. So from the digital identity of individuals to companies to trusted services, there's a lot of work to be done over the next month and a half because trusted certified service providers need to be migrated by May 2027. Well, in any case, thank you to everybody. Thank you particularly to our speakers. And a round of applause, please, for our 3 expert speakers on trusted services. Thank you.